Hey, Brassvax here. Hop and I have been shooting a lot of bullpups recently, and while my journey is just getting started, mostly out of relentless bullying to try 'em all, catch 'em all if you will, one question I keep getting is why start with the Desert Tech MDRx, the, subject of today's video. Pretty simple really. To me, it's the most interesting. The AUG, X95, Tavor, whatever, you name it, are all known quantities. And while I will eventually get to them, the MDRx was always sort of a curiosity to me. And I just don't really like the Hellion. Don't worry, I'll try one. Let me set the stage so you know what I'm getting at here. When I first got into firearms circa 2012, 2013, pistol braces weren't a thing yet, and 16-inch or 18-inch nut and fancy clone-correct SPRs were the meta. Short rifles were still desirable, sort of, but the NFA and the fact that compromise wasn't a word in our collective dictionary yet, everything had to be capable of doing everything, and to the best of its ability. Thus, in conjunction with a fatwa being declared on the DI system, and at the time the utter reverence of the piston system, bullpups skyrocketed in cultural popularity, being a near perfect fit for these, I guess we could call it market conditions. And alongside the release of the original Tavor to the US market, the storm was kind of set for these things to take over. The love letter to bullpups, and the Tavor specifically from the Military Arms channel, certainly helped as well. Seriously, find yourself a girl that looks at you like Mac looks at bullpups. But as the honeymoon phase sort of began to wear out, and despite all the inherent advantages of the bullpup, even bullpup fanboys found that each rifle had their series of upsides, but also a bunch of weird quirks and downsides, often due to the fact that most of these were designed quite some time ago. What was really needed was a single bullpup, designed to modern standards, combining all the upsides and development into a single rifle. And thus the MDR was born, the future of the bullpup. But you already know the end of this story. Its current year in the MDR and MDRx not only did not herald the age of the bullpup, but it's also probably one of the least popular bullpup designs on the market right now. Hence my initial curiosity. What's the deal with all these MDRXs? But before answering that question, we actually have to take a look at the MDRx. How does it work? What's the manual of arms? You name it. Hey, this MDRx? The ammo, my hair loss as a result of this review, was made possible by Venture Surplus. They fund the channel because YouTube won't. Venture Surplus sells you surplus gear, new, used, and everything in between. Myself and my friends have been shopping there for quite some time with our own money, so I have no problem recommending that you go check them out. Today's buy of the day, a term I just made up on the spot, is the Venerable Whoopee. Most people know what one of these things are, but essentially it's a M81 camo blankie. Venture has gotten a large shipment in, so if you want to snag one, perhaps one of the last big shipments of these things, go ahead and grab one. If you watch this on release, there'll be a discount code down in the description, which you can use, if you want to save money, no pressure. That's really about that. Thank you, Venture Surplus, and on with the show. What did you call it?
Mobile Rape Shack.
Mobile Rape Shack. Oh, hi!
It sways badly when they...
We're gonna die.
This thing's gonna end up in the ditch next to the Dodge Ram.
Welcome to my influencer studio, where the only thing you can see is my fire alarm. Amazing. It annoys some people, but I'm reviewing this, though I will talk about it, but I'm reviewing this entirely from the perspective of a 5.56 bullpup. For those that don't know, yeah. So the handguard can come off, in some cases the muzzle device needs to come off, barrel comes off, and you can swap this from 5.56 to 308 to 6.5 Creedmoor, back to 5.56 in a very short time span. But to me, those are all fundamentally different rifles, and they would have to be reviewed individually, especially when you go from 5.56 to 308. It's a completely different beast. So I will mention the different caliber conversions and some of the aspects of them, but ultimately, we're going to be talking about this as a 5.56, fighting rifle. What does Grand Thumb say? Tip to ass, tip to butt. So starting out, already I fucked it up. This handguard's an aftermarket handguard. It's the blah, blah, blah. I'll get into more details as to why and how this thing handles later, but yeah, it's a drop-in handguard that you can replace it with. You have access over here to the gas adjustment regulator over here. This is where the magic happens essentially, and it's a pretty good gas block. I found that typically a lot of guns, the gas blocks end up be a set it and forget it, like you set it, and then it carbon locks,
And then you have to forget it because the gun needs to be deep cleaned before you're able to move that thing. I found this thing it's a really competent gas block. The only part, and everyone knows this, is the famous waffle iron gas block feature. This little black thing right here is part of the gas block design, or sorry, it's part of the gas block design. Sounds bougie as fuck. It's part of the gas block, right? And I think originally they were like, you can put your optic on here so it doesn't lose zero. Whatever. All that it really does is if you have a lot of stuff on your handguard and you reach back here, sometimes you will waffle iron the shit out of your thumb. Okay, charging handle. So the charging handle is non-reciprocating, right? So as in, it won't move during the action of the rifle, and it's a good bit back. Some of the bullpups have their charging handle really far forward, and then you get the roller delayed problem where, yeah, you have a nice, you can get a front rail, but the charging handle's in the way. So you can't actually put anything up there because it impedes at least one of the sides for usage of aftermarket parts. Instead of a reversible that you might see on a lot of rifles, it's simply there on both sides. I didn't find it to be an issue ultimately. This charging handle also does the HK thing. The logic with this is, and I think a lot of people quickly figured it out when they removed the ability to lock a charging handle like this, the X95 and the Tavor kind of come to mind, is that the only way to lock this gun to the rear is to do this hokey, there we go, because, is to lock it to the rear like this, because this is the bolt drop, bolt release, bolt catch, whatever you want to call it, and that is a very awkward motion to do. So in normal operations, yeah, you're going to get slide lock like this. You simply take your magazine, insert it, and drop it forward like that. Cool, right? But what if you have a malfunction? What if you need to lock it to the rear at the range? Yeah, no one wants to do what I just did. We get rearward thing has 2 ejection ports. Now this is beginning to become more standard with bullpups, or they use other weird wonky ways to get around it. The MDR does it in the way I think is most efficient. It's just, buy it. If you're left-handed, you swap it over. If you're right-handed, you swap it over. The cool thing about the MDRx and the MDR actually is that you simply unscrew this, take it apart, cut yourself on all the sharp edges on the inside. I still have a slight cut mark on my finger because of that. Entirely my fault, I'm a goober. But, and then you could just simply swap the bolt ejection over from left to right. That's super cool because something like the X95, for example, or the AUG the AUG needs to just be a left-hand version, and the X95 you need to swap the whole bolt out for a left-hand eject model. This one, from the factory, is configurable for either left or right-handed. Now, one of the famous calling cards of the MDRx and the MDR is that it's forward eject. Look, I'll be real, I think you guys know this thing hasn't had the best track record of reliability in its earlier versions, and a lot of that was attributable to the fact that, well, the forward eject thing it's a pretty fancy feature to include on the dust cover itself. It also weighs about half a pound more, so I decided, you know what, whatever, let's just stick with side eject and make everyone's life that wants to shoot this thing during my testing period, life's completely miserable. Ow! Coming to the rear, we have 2 QD cups, the small things that matter. A lot of bullpups just fucking suck to put a sling on because they were never designed to have a sling, or if they were designed to have a sling, it's like sling as a holster and not sling as a thing that you constantly use. That is, it's mounted, down here and then looks up here, and all you do is, the sling helps you get the rifle to the field, and then you unsling and never use the sling again. We also have a magazine release up front over here, standard stuff, press, out comes the magazine. Now, this is probably one of the issues I have with this gun. My magazine release kind of sucks. Yeah, it's not very good. Mine's constantly binding up, and I'm not really sure why. I've gone in there, tried to figure it out, can't really get it to go. Now, a lot of people are like, Brassfax, you're a fucking noodle arm. Okay, sure, but I do climbing. I do have strong finger strength, probably more than the average, and yeah, this thing is just completely binding up on me. Speaking of linkage, good transition. The trigger on this thing, how is it? You should probably remove the safety. And it breaks, right? There's very little take up, there's no schlop, there's whatever. I'd say the only downside is the reset is kind of bullpuppy feeling no shit, but machine gun trigger feeling, kind of like the F2000, kind of like the TP9, where there's just a very long forward reset. But on the press, oh, it's excellent, right? It's absolutely easily a top 3 bullpup trigger. A lot of people point out that there's a lot of pins across of it. Most of these are just, like kind of like AR-15 style pins that hold the upper and lower receiver together. This too has an upper and lower receiver. Unfortunately, these pins are incredibly stiff. You basically need a hammer and mallet, or a hammer and mallet, you use both of them. You need like a hammer and then like a pin to kind of punch all these out because they're so incredibly stiff. How is it to shoot? I think a lot of people say that it's soft recoiling. I think that is mostly to do with the fact that it has an adjustable gas system, which, is cheat codes for any rifle to be soft shooting, right? But yeah, no, it's fairly soft shooting. You can see it when I'm shooting in a lot of this footage that the gun is not moving at all. Now, that mostly probably has to do with the fact that the gun weighs like 13 pounds in some of those configurations. More on that, trust me. But it's a soft shooting gun for sure. Now, I think due to the recoil systems, it's a little rocky if you're not doing your job properly, especially since it's rear heavy. The gun likes to kind of, like rock up and down, right, instead of just jiggle quickly. Kind of like AK versus AR-15. AR-15s are very snappy, high cyclic rate recoil cycle. You shoot a AK, and you can tune them down with an aggressive block and all that stuff, or get a 5.45 variant, but those tend to recoil a little longer. That's how I would describe this. Soft shooting and recoil wise, but the gun recoils a little bit longer and tends to result in a lot more, muzzle floppage, for the lack of a better term. Not that was not a perfect term to describe it. Muzzle floppage. So yeah, if you're not doing your part, the gun tends to rock because it's so rear heavy and the recoil cycle seems noticeably slower. And then finally, to say ergonomics wise, if I don't have stuff up here, which is generally how I would recommend running one of these for reasons we'll get to, I actually really like the overall length of pull ratio. It has a slightly longer length of pull compared to the X95 and Tavor, if I recall correctly. At least with those, I find the magazine kind of brushes up against the back of my trigger hand, forcing me to have a more kind of chicken winged out setup. Not that this one doesn't have that as well. All bullpups do, where the magazine is going to push your arm outward, perhaps compared to what you're more comfortable for. But I find this strikes a good balance. A lot of people are going to look at this and they're going to be kind of, in the mindset of AR-15s or standard configured rifles and think, wow, that sounds like a really normal rifle. And it is, and that's why I think it's such a big deal. Because when you look at every single one of the other bullpups on the market, there's all these little stupid little quirks in the ergonomic package that make it less appealing, especially the military style ones. And this, at the time, was probably one of the first ones to really, at least on the surface, look like it had the complete package. We have the side eject swap, we have good swing swivel points, we have a modernized front swappable handguard, we have a good pistol grip length, we have the good trigger, we can lock the bolt to the rear. Magazine is ejectable out front. We don't have weird accuracy issues where the gun for some reason is 6 MOA. We have all of this together.
All right, back to the thesis, back to that question we initially phrased, 10 minutes ago. Why did the MDRx sort of fail to catch on? Easy answer is the MDR release was a severely drawn out process being delayed several times, only for the final product that eventually did hit shelves to not work at all. To this day, the MDR and MDRx are grappling with the reputation of that initial botched release. Desert Tech has tried hard to remedy this with a constant iteration and updated design. We had the MDRx, the micro extreme rifle, or I guess whatever. There's a bit of confusion here because, well, the Gen 1 was called the MDR, and then we had the name change for the quote-unquote Gen 2 with the MDRx, and then we had the Gen 3, which was also the MDRx, and I think this is the Gen 4, the MDRx. So, the version I have can be informally called the 2023 MDRx, which, as far as I can tell with my experience for 1500 rounds and some other reviews, seems to have solved a lot of the reliability issues. But this initial start and the confusion of which version exactly is which, and all of the anecdotal, posts on the internet, do absolutely still feed into the notion that the MDRx is kind of an unreliable rifle. Combined with the fact that it's $2,000, I think most people have completely written off the MDRx as a viable platform and are now looking elsewhere. That being said, I think the feature set offered by the MDR might actually be good enough that it could end up as a sort of if you know secret in the bullpup industry. But when you look under the surface, well, you get to the hard answer. And, well, let's get into it.
Don't rape us, sir.
The snacks are on me. It's literally a rape van! If I had to point to a single thing that makes this rifle undesirable to me, it's that it has a caliber conversion feature. Now, I'll give it to Desertec. It is well executed enough, and it exists, and it works. Which, Jesus Christ, I laugh every time I think back to all of those SCAR program hopefuls that were like, hey, caliber conversion. And not a single one of them was able to execute on having the ability to go on a website and hit add to cart in 5 years after any of those were produced, even though everyone was bragging about how cool of a feature that was. So yeah, absolutely, props to Desertec. You can actually buy the caliber conversion kits for this thing. Except a 300 blackout, but that's another story. The barrel conversion, while not AUG fast, is sufficiently simple and easy that it's not really a hassle. The only real downside is that certain muzzle devices end up being too big for the inner diameter of the handguard, so you end up basically needing to remove the muzzle device twice every time you want to swap barrels. Or you really just need to buy a second handguard and kind of have each one living in each barrel. So, while the feature works and is well supported, the MDRx caliber conversion is the victim of a smarter customer that has realized that caliber conversions are a stupid fucking gimmick. Or, if you want to be a little nicer, limited application at best. The real world isn't the hot swap mechanic from Battlefield 2042. While it sounds cool on paper, you're not actually hot swapping your rifle for different mission sets right before you head out of the door, or God forbid, in the middle of an actual scenario. You gotta zero the rifle every single time you swap around, even if you have good return to zero mounts, because the way the barrel interfaces doesn't have a built-in torque limiter, nor will using a torque wrench get you exactly back on. The real use case for caliber conversion is military logistical things. To have the same chassis fleet-wide, and then you configure it for a bunch of different positions, say in a squad. DMR, BR, IAR, fighting rifle, you name it, all built on a similar parts-compatible chassis with minor changes. But the military doesn't even do that, and they've tried, which brings us to the realization that most people had: if you want multiple rifles, the answer is just to own multiple rifles. The caliber conversions on this thing also tend to kind of suck, but I'll get to that in the accuracy component. Bear with me. So the reason I harp on this caliber conversion is that it's a serious opportunity cost that comes with a number of downsides. You can't just ignore the fact that this thing exists. Well, you can, but you're gonna feel it in the weight category. The MDRx is in the territory of prohibitively heavy. Lift more is the forever mantra going to be shouted in this YouTube and all other YouTube comment sections, but consider this: both the side eject and the forward eject model weigh slightly more or the same amount than an LR308 battle rifle, at 8 or 8.5 pounds respectively with nothing on it. Which makes sense because the MDRx is a 308 battle rifle that happens to have a 5.56 barrel on it. You put a base loadout of a optic, light, and sling on there, it's going to weigh more than an AR-15 with an entire kitchen sink on it. You put the kitchen sink on it, weighs more than most decked 308 battle rifles with a full-length barrel. Being a bullpup, weight is something that sort of comes with the territory, and a lot of that weight is masked by all that junk up front being balanced out by a rear-heavy kind of setup. But the MDRx is still undoubtedly a pig, and you need to keep that in mind depending on your use case for this thing. Time to talk about the Handguard. The Handguard is an interesting beast because we still need to talk about the caliber conversion thing again. In this case, it's because the Handguard needs to come off and on rapidly for the barrel change feature. Yeah, makes sense, of course. Unfortunately, that means the way it's designed, it's pinned in place with a pretty loose crossbolt, more so for indexing, combined with M-lock style attachment screws to handle the rest. Yes, that's right, this Handguard has M-lock. Like M-lock to attach to the gun. I think you can really quickly figure out the consequences of that choice. Oh!
Okay, so now let's try it.
Oh, it's the Handguard. It's for sure the Handguard.
So the Handguard just... I also, I've unlocked a new tier, because originally it was just, I could feel it like shifting one amount.
Yeah.
Now it does it twice. Like 2 clicks. I get 2 clicks of adjustment out of this Handguard. Okay, so we can salvage this. D-bolt D2 with the little section on top to mount an optic. And you just mount it back on the receiver, so it's fine.
Hydra mount vindicated.
And then at that point, you might as well get the bulkable.
And at that point, you may just kill yourself.
Oh, wow.
It also doesn't come off with any non-standard muzzle device.
So this is going to change the review a little bit.
It's not just that forced movement here causes zero shift. Bracing it off of cover or causes it to slowly shift around over time, such that in a single range session, my laser went from 0 to completely off target. And in theory, if you fuck up and potentially mistakenly rest between the 90-degree section between the handguard and the barrel as a brace, which happens a lot more than you'd like to imagine, you'll instantly unzero anything on that handguard. A lot of people that don't own an MDRx but wish they did then bombarded me in the comment section that I gotta go buy a Black Label handguard, it's metal, it will solve all of your problems. And since I'm a slave to my viewers, love you guys, I went again and did so. On a side note, nothing against the company, but Black Label sounds like a hipster IPA brand, not a handguard company, whatever. Okay, unfortunately the Black Label handguard is still using the same attachment method. It's functionally just M-lock on the inside. If I grab the barrel and push against this thing, I can move it a hilarious amount still. But in practice, as long as I resist the temptation to do that, props to the IPA handguard company, zero shift seems to be significantly reduced compared to the OEM handguard. Overall, it's a pretty decent handguard in and of itself. It's a bit girthy, wide compared to the original handguard, but hey, maybe you're into that kind of thing. It's all metal, the finish is nice, you name it. Just a little frustrating that if you want to hold 0 on the front end of the gun, it's never really truly going to happen, and even to kind of approach that, you need to spend about $200-$250 to replace the OEM handguard just right out of the gate. Speaking of the accuracy, how is it? I honestly had pretty high hopes for this thing because it's from Desertec. I got to go to a Desertec hosted event some many years back and mess with their bullpup bolt guns on one of their ranges, which is lights out accurate, even with movers out to 800. Super fun, makes me want a 338 SRS real bad. Who needs dope when the gun is basically point of aim, point of impact from Utah to East Oregon? Anyways, where was I? Oh, right, accuracy. Yeah, it's fine. Certainly combat accurate, but in the 3 rounds I chose, none of them seemed to be all that impressive. 62 grain Normals were pretty bleh at 4 MOA, which is strange because typically I have good luck with that. 55 grain Winchester FMJ was a bit better. X-Tac was functionally the same as that. And then it seemed to really like 77 grain OTMs at 1.5 to 2 MOA. This is a weird but sort of reoccurring theme that you notice with a lot of bullpups, not all, where the gun isn't really sniper accurate, disqualifying it from one of the feature sets that a lot of people initially look to with a bullpup to utilize all that extra barrel length we got, and that'd be a semi-automatic precision 5.56 rifle. Most of these end up just really only being combat accurate, and I'd slot the MDRx into that category, combat accurate. On that note, the 20-inch variants of the MDRx, so the 308 and the 6.5 Creedmoor, seem to have horrific, what appears to be, we're guessing here, barrel whip issues. So, to be sure, I didn't actually test this, but I talked to a lot of MDRx owners who have the 20-inch barrel. There's also an aggregate Google document that shows the accuracy of a lot of the customers, and it seems to indicate, alongside the cottage industry that wants to replace the MDRx 20-inch barrel with aftermarket ones, that the 20-inch barrels are just not that accurate. The 16-inch one seems to have much better accuracy-wise, what we would expect out of a platform like this, but that ultimately leads us into our conclusion quite nicely. The 16-inch 308 battle rifle version seems to be what this gun was ultimately designed to do, and you end up with something that, while initially very heavy in the 5.56 variant, ends up being actually right on the line, maybe even a little lighter for a lot of 308 battle rifles in the LR308 flavor. And because it's so rear heavy, it's much more maneuverable and much more usable than, say, a comparable 16-inch 308 battle rifle. From the perspective of a 5.56 bullpup though, the MDRx fails in its original mission. It aimed for the stars and ended up just being another bullpup. It does some things really well and some things, maybe a lot of things, kind of poorly. The MDRx can, in some distinctly low accuracy, non-night vision configurations, work pretty well. And if that's all you want to do, I'd say it's probably a pretty okay rifle. The issue is, it's not a great rifle. And for most people, understandably, that is a mandatory requirement when it is the most expensive in class and still needs to fight through the stigma of almost a decade of issues, while still having an unfortunate amount of large issues.
Oh man, just the weight of this. Reach. So substantial. You're just too big. You're gonna have to shrink a little bit. Snoof. There it was. That was a snoof.